I've never been this mortified in my life. In the middle of my yard, a group of firefighters had gathered around the statue, my statue, marveling like it was the eighth wonder of the world. Holy crap! It's spot on. Looks exactly like the captain. Check out those pecs, those abs, those thighs, damn, the sculpting is flawless. This is some master-level work. Wait a sec. Why's it got a silk scarf wrapped around its waist? My face was on fire as I charged forward, yelling. Don't touch that. Too late. The white scarf fluttered through the air like it was in slow motion, caught the breeze, and drifted straight onto Matthew's face. The collective gasp from the crowd hit like a wave. Okay, wow. That's really over the top. You guys don't get it. This is art. Art needs imagination. And the bigger the imagination, the better the art, right? Matthew pulled the scarf off his face, eyes locked on the statue, his statue, for what felt like forever. I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me whole. Or just explode on the spot. Either worked. Selena, he said, voice low and laced with amusement, long time no see. My brain felt like a kettle left on high. Steam practically hissed out of my ears. We hadn't seen each other since high school graduation. I'd imagined our reunion 1,000 different ways. This was not one of them. Matthew and I used to sit next to each other in high school. Then, during our senior year, I transferred to the art track, and we gradually lost touch. I later heard he got into a sports college and, after graduation, returned to our hometown to become a firefighter. So I did the same, moved back, opened a small online shop, and started sculpting custom statues full-time. That morning, the charger cord by my bed, left plugged in way too long, caught fire. By the time I noticed, the blanket and curtains were already burning. I was in my studio, deep in a painting session, when I smelled smoke and frantically called 911. The firefighters arrived fast. I wasn't expecting Matthew to be among them. And I definitely wasn't expecting him to charge into my room and carry out a statue that was a life-sized, 1:1 replica of him. He must have been in a rush and didn't look too closely. Still, credit where it's due, the thing weighed nearly 200 pounds. Heaving it like it was nothing, Matthew emerged holding the very scarf that had started this entire public humiliation. He brushed past the gawking crowd of firefighters, walked straight up to the statue, and, dead serious, tied the scarf back around its waist. Everyone kept looking back and forth between him and the sculpture. This is wild. I feel like I'm watching a sci-fi movie, two Matthews. And just like that, my love life, barely born, died a fiery, irreversible death. There was no coming back from this. I would never be able to face Matthew again. I saw them out with a hollow heart and a dead soul. Just as I thought it was finally over, Matthew got into the truck. Then climbed right back out. He walked up to me, eyes steady, and held out his hand. Add me, he said, smirking. We were desk buddies, after all. I couldn't even lift my head. Fumbling, flustered, I pulled out my phone to add him. It wasn't until the fire truck started to pull away that I dared glance up, just in time to see Matthew leaning out the window, eyes locked on mine with a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. That look, teasing, unreadable, sent me spinning around in panic. I turned to bolt back inside. And slammed straight into the iron gate with a clang that echoed through the entire neighborhood. I clutched my face instantly. Warm, slippery blood was already pouring from my nose into my hands. At some point, God knows when, Matthew had circled back. He was suddenly standing in front of me again, face full of concern. Come on, he said, voice gentle but firm. I'm taking you to the hospital. I protested like my life depended on it, but that didn't stop him. Next thing I knew, I was sitting on a hospital bed, nose bandaged, face burning, dignity somewhere back on the pavement. The nurse told me to lie down and rest for 10 minutes, then left the room. I lay there in silence, nervously picking at the edge of the bedsheet, cheeks still on fire. Then Matthew's voice cut through, low and amused. You keep that up, and you're gonna tear my sleeve. I turned my head in disbelief. At some point, he'd leaned his arm on the bed, and I'd somehow started clawing at his shirt instead of the sheet. Yeah. No doubt about it. I'd been cursed. I should have read his birth chart or something. This man was here to ruin me. Matthew insisted on driving me home. Said I was injured. Said I shouldn't be alone. Said he'd help clean up the mess while we were at it. I fought him on it like my life depended on it, short of throwing myself to the ground and playing dead, but nothing could stop his determination. He tidied up the yard and my bedroom, then announced he needed to do a fire safety check. Just in case, he said, already moving from room to room like he owned the place. And then he opened the door on the east side of the house. I knew, in that moment, everything was over. Inside stood a massive sculpture of a couple, life-sized, hyper-detailed. The man was cradling the woman in a classic bridal carry. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, one hand tenderly resting on his bare chest. Their eyes met in an intense, electric gaze, like they were 2 seconds away from kissing or combusting. I had to admit, it was objectively gorgeous. The sculpting was masterful, smooth muscle lines, delicate bone structure, even the strands of hair were visible in the right light. At the base, carved in elegant lettering, was the title. Adam and Eve. And of course, like any true depiction of Adam and Eve, neither of them was wearing a single stitch of clothing. Matthew stood frozen, staring at the sculpture, awe and horror battling on his face. Holy shit, he breathed. Expression blank, I grabbed him by the arm and pulled him out of the room. Still blank-faced, I walked him across the yard. Then I shut the gate with a slam. The man who stood outside was no longer my first crush, no longer the person I'd secretly pined for all these years. No. He was now the embodiment of my ultimate humiliation. Goodbye, Matthew. Rest in peace, whatever chance we had. After 2 full days of cleaning up, I was going stir-crazy. I needed to get out of the house, move my body, clear my head, so I decided to go for a run. At some point, Matthew had texted me. Eve, are you still awake? Emotional damage. I left him on read. The statue he saw? It wasn't even supposed to be about him. It was a commission, some guy's Valentine's gift to his wife. But after sculpting theirs, I got inspired. My hands itched. The creative high took over. I couldn't help it, I made a version with Matthew and myself. It turned out to be one of my proudest pieces. Normally, I kept it covered, safe under fabric. But that morning, I just cleaned it and thought, why not let it dry out in the sun? And then Matthew walked in and saw everything. Anyway. Back to my run. I drove to a nearby park, popped in my earbuds, and took off at a steady pace. I was just starting to hit my stride when I heard it in the distance, sharp, rhythmic shouting. Left, right, left. Left, right, left. Confused, I turned to look, and my soul almost left my body. There he was. Matthew. Wearing a black training shirt and shorts, jogging in sync with his entire squad of firefighters. When he saw me turn around, his face lit up and he waved. And then, chaos. Hey! That's the artist. The one who made the captain's statue. The whole formation lost it. Guys who'd never seen me before started jogging over like I was some kind of celebrity exhibit they needed to inspect. I panicked. Turned on my heel. And ran. Full sprint. Like my life depended on it. Matthew, with those stupidly long legs of his, caught up effortlessly. I ran. They chased. There was no escape. Right as they were about to catch up, me cornered and minutes away from becoming a live exhibit, I spotted the public restroom ahead and made a desperate dash inside. 3 seconds later, a chorus of horrified screams echoed from within. Ah! A perv! A woman perv! I stumbled back out, hands raised in apology, face flushed with humiliation. Sorry. Wrong bathroom. My bad, I'm so sorry. Behind me, the firefighter squad was absolutely losing it, laughing so hard they could barely stand. Attention! No laughing! Matthew barked, trying and failing to restore order. Then he cracked first. Pfft! That was it. Total chaos. The laughter exploded around me like fireworks. I didn't react. Just turned around, dead-faced, and kept running. Social death? At this point, I was numb. You die enough times in 1 week, you start to get used to it. And honestly, something about that embarrassment must have lit a fire under me, because by the time I reached the parking lot, I glanced at my app and saw my pace. 5K in under 20 minutes. Hell yeah. Selena. I turned, and there he was again. Matthew. Standing right behind me. When you see me, he asked, breathless, why do you always run? His face was glistening with sweat, dark hair damp and clinging to his forehead. His smile was wide and easy, eyes soft and steady. And just like that, he looked exactly the way I remembered him. The boy I couldn't stop thinking about. The boy who once made it hard to sleep, and impossible to forget. Matthew got into college on a sports scholarship, and I used to see him on the track all the time, shirt clinging to his back, sweat dripping down his neck, every move bursting with energy. At every school sports meet, he was the star. Sprints, long distance, high jump, long jump. Basically a walking decathlon. He had this tall, athletic build and sharp, chiseled features. But unlike the polished look of boy band idols, his appeal was raw, like the kind of young war general you'd read about in old novels. Proud. Fierce. Unapologetically masculine. The girls used to say he was walking testosterone. The kind you couldn't look away from once he entered a room. Some people just are your youth. They blindside you, leave their mark, and become the moonlight that lingers on your chest, pure, distant, unforgettable. That said, the moonlight might have been better if it didn't talk. Selena, Matthew said, dead serious, there's something off about your statue. I mean, yeah, artistic interpretation is important, but it shouldn't stray too far from real life, right? I stared at him, stunned. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? You should really study the real thing more carefully, he added, stepping closer, eyes locked onto mine like I was a challenge he wanted to lose. Then he grinned. Let me model for you. Model. For that. I swallowed hard. Because, well, that was one hell of an offer to turn down. I never thought he'd actually do it. But there he was, Matthew, in my studio, sitting casually on the sofa like he belonged there. He leaned back, completely at ease, watching me with that infuriatingly relaxed smile in his eyes. I, on the other hand, was an absolute mess. I spilled the tea, kicked over a stool, basically performed a one-woman slapstick routine. Selena, he said, amused, you're still as fun to watch as ever. I blushed so hard I could feel it in my ears, shrinking into myself as I carefully poured him a new cup of tea. You really mean it? You're okay being my model? I looked up at him, eyes wide with hope. Matthew had the kind of face artists dream about, sharp, clean lines, deep-set eyes, features carved with contrast and symmetry. That's why I made that statue of him in the first place. Sure, 40% of it was a crush. But the other 60%? Pure aesthetics. He was a living sculpture. The kind of beauty that made your fingers itch to sculpt or sketch. A human textbook of proportion, angles, and light. Just seeing him made ideas explode in my head like fireworks. Matthew gave a small nod, his voice soft. Have I ever said no to you? Those few words hit harder than they should have, dragging me straight back to high school. We'd been seatmates since freshman year. Matthew always looked out for me. I used to sketch during class, and whenever the teacher walked by, he'd nudge me under the table with his foot, just in time to hide it. I was forgetful, always leaving my textbooks at home. When the teacher demanded that all offenders stand up, he'd slide his book across the desk to me, no hesitation, then stand up himself, calm as ever, like it was nothing. It had been 5 whole years since then. But in that moment, sitting in my studio, his presence felt exactly the same. Warm. Easy. Unshakably kind. He was still that boy from my past. Just taller, stronger, and somehow even harder to resist. I pulled out an old oil painting book, heart pounding, and asked carefully, half hoping he'd say no, half terrified he'd say yes. "I want to paint this," I said. "Prometheus Bound. Would that be okay?" Matthew glanced at the page. One eyebrow went up. The painting showed a half-naked man, a tattered cloth barely covering his waist, thick chains wrapped tightly around his torso. Every muscle was pulled taut under the strain, raw power caught in captivity, a perfect storm of tension and wild beauty. He gave me a sideways look, eyes narrowing slightly. Then, without missing a beat. "Sure. When do we start?" I shot to my feet like I'd just won the lottery. "Right now. I'll take you to the studio." This painting had been living in my head for years. I always meant to do it from imagination, but now, with Matthew standing in as the model, it was like a long dormant dream clicking into place. I couldn't contain my excitement. As soon as we got to the studio, I started pulling out props, plastic chains, shredded fabric, background boards, like I was prepping a full-scale stage play. Matthew looked around, stunned. "Selena, this was premeditated." I handed him a smock, eyes shining with glee, doing a terrible job of hiding my anticipation. He sighed the sigh of a man walking into a trap he built with his own hands. Gave me one last look of playful regret. Then disappeared into the other room to change. I set up the easel, practically bouncing in my seat, barely able to believe this was real. Today, I was finally painting my actual muse, in the flesh. The moment Matthew opened the door and stepped into the studio, I forgot how to breathe. He looked even better than I imagined. His body wasn't bulky, but perfectly proportioned, lean, defined, powerful. Broad shoulders. Firm chest. 8-pack abs you could practically sculpt from marble. And those faint lines leading down from his hips, like arrows pointing to danger. I felt my face heat up instantly. I walked over to guide him into the pose, my heart hammering like it was trying to break free from my ribcage. As he settled into position, I wrapped the plastic chains around him. My fingers brushed against his skin, smooth, warm, unreal. A jolt shot from my fingertips straight into my chest, then ricocheted everywhere. By the time I sat back down, my hands were shaking. This didn't feel real. This felt like a dream written by some feverish version of me from 5 years ago. Sunlight poured through the window, casting golden shadows across Matthew's body. The whole scene lit up, like a classical painting come to life. Alive. Glorious. Beautiful. He might have been looking at me. Maybe even the whole time. But I was gone, completely immersed in the lines, the colors, the canvas. I don't know how much time passed. Then. Chaos. Shouting outside the door. Heavy footsteps. The sound of something slamming. And then a booming voice blared through a megaphone. "We've got you surrounded. Let the hostage go and come out with your hands up." I repeat, let the hostage go. What? The actual hell? I had to be sleep deprived. That was the only explanation. There was no way I was actually hearing. "You inside. You're surrounded. Release the hostage and come out with your hands up." There it was again. The gruff, amplified voice cut through the air like a bad punchline. Still holding my paintbrush, I wandered dazedly toward the door, completely lost. Through the rusted bars of my front gate, I saw them. Police cars. Flashing lights. Officers with guns drawn. The whole front yard was a crime scene I had apparently just sleepwalked into. As soon as I stepped outside, the crowd stirred. Hands in the air. I instinctively raised both arms, paintbrush still in one hand, blinking like a deer in headlights. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted half the neighborhood up in a tree, peering over from the next yard like it was their own personal soap opera. Whoa, look at that. The kidnapper's a pretty girl. I've told you, man. It's always the pretty ones. That's where the danger is. Kidnapper? What kidnapper? Right then, Matthew stepped outside, shirtless, glowing from the light, and still covered in painted-on cuts and bruises from the Prometheus setup. I had thought something was missing in the composition earlier, so I'd added dramatic streaks of red across his torso. Some artistic flair. A little mythological torture. You know. For the vibe. So now, what the cops saw was a nearly naked man, bloodied and dazed, emerging from a private home. The scene exploded. Oh my God. She tortured him, look at those wounds. Is this a hostage kink thing? Susie, get over here. This is better than cable. Sir, don't worry. We're here to rescue you. You. Don't move. Hands where I can see them. A tall, broad-shouldered officer shouted at me through a megaphone. No. I didn't want to raise my hands. I wanted to lie face down on the pavement and dissolve into the earth. Face first. Quietly. And so, Matthew, still shirtless and painted in faux bruises, and I were both escorted into separate police vehicles like two criminals caught in the middle of a fever dream. Leaving the neighborhood was a whole other circus. The gawking crowd was so thick the squad cars couldn't even pull out. Officers had to physically clear a path, parting the sea of gossip-hungry neighbors just to let us through. I'd rented this place because I needed the space, an open yard, a few studios to work in. It was cheap, had decent light, and wasn't too far from the city. Perfect for my sculpture business. Except for one fatal flaw. Everyone in this community had too much time and zero boundaries. People were already whispering behind my back. A single girl, renting a big property all alone? Of course it raised eyebrows. People asked questions. Subtle ones. Not so subtle ones. Sometimes flat-out intrusive ones. And now this? This? This was a career-ending, reputation-demolishing, neighborhood-wide PR disaster. And worst of all, I'd dragged Matthew down with me. The local precinct chief looked at Matthew with a deeply apologetic smile, rubbing the back of his neck like this whole thing was just an unfortunate sitcom episode. Ah, Captain Matthew, you know, this was just one big misunderstanding, yeah? He sighed. Really sorry about all this. We just got a call from someone in your neighborhood reporting a kidnapping. They even sent us photos. Look here. Matthew and I leaned over to look at his phone. The photo had clearly been taken from the second floor of the house across the street, probably through binoculars. You could just barely make out the figure of a man, shirtless, bloody, and chained, sitting in the middle of my studio. White curtains fluttered dramatically in the frame, adding to the full crime thriller effect. Honestly, from that angle? It did look like a hostage situation. I dropped my gaze, cheeks burning, head throbbing with second-hand shame. My entire skull felt like it was about to overheat and shut down. As we walked out of the police station, Matthew looked at me, and then, he cracked up. Full, unfiltered laughter. Selena, he said between chuckles, being around you is so much fun. I looked at his eyes crinkling with joy, his smile carefree and unbothered. But all I could think was, Matthew, you don't understand yet. The weight of small-town gossip doesn't hit right away. Give it a few days, you'll stop laughing soon enough. After dropping me back at the community gate, he headed straight to the fire station. I, meanwhile, went to the little convenience shop near my street to grab a bottle of water, pretending my life wasn't on fire. As I stood by the fridge, I heard it, whispers. Clear as day. Young people these days, huh? So much imagination, one older woman said with a dramatic shake of her head. Tisk, TSK. Did you see the chains? Her friend replied, eyes wide, tone scandalized. Oh my. I nearly died of embarrassment. I turned to look. Two aunties, deep in conversation, faces full of judgment, voices full of drama. But shame? Let's be real. Not a shred of it on their faces. If anything, they looked thrilled. The next morning, I was still half asleep when my phone started ringing nonstop. Groggy, eyes barely open, I picked up. "Hello? Daughter," my mom's voice shrieked down the line. "Did you hear?" "Hear what, Mom?" I muttered, still wrapped in blankets and denial. "That Matthew. Your high school classmate. Remember him? He was supposed to go on a blind date with your Aunt Lisa's daughter. The whole family liked him, said he was polite, handsome, stable. Very good husband material." "Okay," I said, already bracing for impact. "Well, guess what? Yesterday he ended up in the police station." "The police station, Selena. The whole neighborhood's talking about it. They say he tied a girl up and whipped her. Left her bloody. Just horrifying. I always thought he was such a nice boy, but turns out he's, perverted. Totally unacceptable." "Mom, it's not," I tried to explain. "No, you listen to me. I remember you two were close in school. I even used to think he could be your future husband. Thank goodness that didn't happen. I'm serious, Selena. Stay away from him, you hear me? That kind of man is dangerous." Click. I lay there, phone in hand, frozen in shame. So that was it. Matthew wasn't my bad luck charm. I was his. I'd destroyed his reputation in less than 24 hours. His would-be in-laws now thought he was a dungeon freak with a taste for whips and blood. What if he never found a wife again? What if I had to compensate? A dangerous thought bloomed in my head. Would it really be so terrible to offer myself? I mean, he was gorgeous. And kind. And funny. And that body. I swallowed. Then grabbed my phone and texted him. "You free tonight? Let me buy you dinner." No reply. I tossed my phone aside and climbed out of bed, forcing myself toward my sketchpad. Lately, I'd been working on a custom commission. A client wanted a classical-style oil painting, inspired by traditional Japanese bijinjie. A tasteful nude. Emphasis on nude. I'd spent the entire day in the studio hunched over sketches, piecing together the composition. By the time I came up for air, the sun was already setting. I rolled my shoulders and flexed my aching wrists, deciding to take a walk across the street in the park to loosen up. The moment I opened my front gate, I saw them. Anti-ambush squad, fully assembled. The group of neighborhood aunties turned as one. Their eyes lit up like slot machines hitting jackpot. I looked toward the park path, and yep. There were more waiting. Clusters of women, all mid-gossip, all side-eyeing me like I was the subject of a Netflix docuseries. There was no escape. Even stray dogs on this street couldn't pass without being part of a rumor. "Selena, darling. Where you off to?" one of them called out sweetly. "Hi, Mrs. Smith," I said with my best fake smile. "Just going for a walk." Immediately, Mrs. Smith elbowed the auntie next to her, Helen, I think, grinning like she had front-row tickets to my downfall. "Oh ho ho, a walk, huh? Bet she's meeting her boyfriend." She leaned in, voice dropping but absolutely still loud enough for everyone to hear. "Selena, you are one lucky girl. That man of yours, so handsome." I tried to keep my cool. "He's not my." "Is he living with you now?" "I heard he's a firefighter. A captain, no less." "Phew. Firefighters are strong, you know. All that stamina, right? Good choice, girl." That was it. I gave up. Shielded my face. And ran like hell. The park was quiet in the early evening. Most of the older folks had already power-walked their way home to cook dinner. I wandered into a more secluded corner, ready to sit and unwind, when I heard it. A panicked, high-pitched voice crying out. Is anyone there? Help! Somebody help! I bolted toward the sound and found a little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, crouched awkwardly on the ground with his head stuck between the iron bars of a railing. Tears were welling up in his eyes. His cheeks were red and puffed from all the struggling. Please help, sis. My sister needs help. I blinked. You mean, you? He looked up at me with this round, serious face, chubby cheeks, messy hair, totally adorable. I knelt down, ruffled his head, and grinned. Okay, but seriously, are you the infamous big head boy from Legend? How did you even get stuck like this? He shot me a glare, clearly offended. My head is not big. The bars are just too close together. I raised a brow and measured the gap with my hands. Uh-huh. Sure. Seemed roomy enough. Then, because I'm apparently powered by poor decisions, I leaned in and, God knows why, stuck my own head between the bars to test it. 1 minute later, there we were. Both of us. Stuck. Truly, a generational bonding moment. The kid looked at me like I'd just lowered the collective IQ of the entire adult population. How can a grown woman be this dumb? I tapped him lightly on the forehead. Shut it. Then extended a hand toward him. Go get help. He crossed his arms, clearly annoyed. Why me? Because I'm too embarrassed to be seen like this. Help. Somebody help us. Under the crushing weight of my threats, the little boy finally started yelling for help. He gave it a solid go. For a while. Nothing. Not even a bird flapped by. Not a soul. Why didn't you bring your phone, sis? He asked, already halfway judging me. I shifted my legs, one of them had gone completely numb. Because, I sighed, I'm stupid. We were both squatting there in shared, growing despair when, finally, salvation arrived in the form of a middle-aged woman power-walking through the park. And not just any woman. Mrs. Smith. I tried to slap a hand over the boy's mouth. Too late. Mrs. Smith. You're out for a walk too, the boy chirped. Oh, thank heavens, Finn. There you are, she cried, rushing over. Wait. Finn? So this kid was Mrs. Smith's grandson? I was still reeling from that bomb when she turned and caught sight of me, my head stuck firmly between iron bars, legs cramping, soul leaving body. Selena, she said, blinking like she couldn't believe her eyes. You too? I didn't even try to explain. There was no explanation. I just lowered my head in shame, accepting my fate. Tomorrow, the community wouldn't just be buzzing with gossip. It would be howling with it. And just when I thought we'd reached the tragic end of this stupid little saga, Mrs. Smith pulled out her phone and called 911. The firefighters arrived quickly. From a distance, I already spotted him, that tall, unmistakable silhouette striding toward my public humiliation with practiced calm. Ma'am, one of them said gently, can you tilt your head up a little? We're having trouble getting a good angle. No. Absolutely not. I buried my face lower, letting my hair fall on both sides like a makeshift curtain of shame. But then, because the universe is cruel and poetic, Mrs. Smith, still watching gleefully from the sidelines, clapped her thigh and practically shouted. Oh my God, isn't that Selena's boyfriend? Selena, your boyfriend is here. I wanted to scream. Then, a strong hand cupped my chin, lifting my face against my will. And there he was. Matthew. Doing his best to keep a straight face, but his eyes were definitely laughing. Another firefighter, clearly also in on the running joke, grinned brightly. Hey. Good to see you again, Miss Artist. Matthew knelt beside me, carefully prying the bars apart with a specialized tool, speaking low and casual like this was totally normal. Selena, he said, if you wanted to see me, you didn't need to go this far. I didn't. That's not. Shut up. I hissed. Meanwhile, Mrs. Smith was 2 steps away from pulling out popcorn. She was practically vibrating, ears perked, as if waiting for the plot twist that would blow this story wide open. Matthew kept working, voice quieter now. I didn't ignore your message this morning, by the way. I was in training. Texted you back when I got a break, but you didn't reply. I blinked. I've got night shift today, he continued. But, how about breakfast tomorrow? I turned my head slightly to look at him. He wasn't looking at me, just focused, calm, jaw tense as he wedged the metal tool into the bars. The evening sun lit up his profile, tracing golden edges across his skin. That sharp nose. Those steady lips. The clean, precise line of his jaw. The person I liked. Had the most beautiful side profile in the world. Covered in dust and shame, I walked back into the neighborhood with Mrs. Smith by my side, my unwilling escort of disgrace. Everyone knew her mouth was faster than the neighborhood bulletin board. If she knew something, everyone would by morning. Congratulations, Selena. You're now officially the most talked about person in the entire community. Once inside, I picked up my phone, still sitting on my desk where I left it. Just as I guessed, several messages from Matthew. My face flushed as I stared at his profile photo. Without thinking, I opened his contact and changed the name to Adam. There. Fitting, wasn't it? I wandered into the studio, work forgotten. Deadlines ignored. I pulled out the portrait I'd been sketching, one of Matthew, unfinished, his gaze caught somewhere between serious and amused. I sat there staring at it, totally absorbed. Fingertips traced his jawline on the paper, and a quiet thought whispered through me. When will I ever get to touch the real thing? Night had crept in without me noticing. My stomach growled, and I got up, heading toward the kitchen. But then froze. From the direction of my bedroom came a soft sound. Barely audible. A quick thud. Like something light had hit the floor, and been picked up. Immediately. My heart seized. Someone was in my room. This neighborhood had its perks, space, privacy, but it also had a reputation. Lots of renters. Lots of strangers coming and going. Just a few weeks ago, a house on the West End had 3 burglars break in at night. The husband got injured trying to stop them. People were still talking about it. And now? No. No way. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed the one number I didn't have to search for. It rang once. Hello? Matthew's voice came through, low and warm, that deep timbre like velvet and steel. I took a breath, then spoke loudly, very loudly. Hi babe. Why aren't you home yet? I smiled into the phone. Not at Matthew. But at whoever was listening from my bedroom. On the other end of the line, Matthew paused. Silent for a beat too long. Then, cautiously. Selena, did you call the wrong number? I forced a light laugh, voice as loud and cheerful as I could fake it. What? You're at the intersection already? Okay, I'll come meet you, I'm starving. Let's grab some late-night food. I added quickly, still projecting. Drive safe, babe. Someone dug a hole at the corner earlier today, watch out for that. My palm was slick with sweat as I clutched the phone. I kept my voice steady, moving slowly toward the front door. Selena, Matthew said, his tone now sharp, alert, are you in danger? I'm coming right now, okay? I said louder, stepping into my shoes by the door. Then, with all my strength, I slammed it shut behind me. The heavy gate let out a loud clang that echoed through the night. I took 2 quick steps forward. Then dropped to a crouch, doubled back, and slipped behind the outer fence. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I pulled a small mirror from my pocket, something I usually kept in the studio for detailing close-ups, and angled it carefully toward my bedroom window. The sheer white curtain was still drawn, soft and almost translucent. The room behind it was dim, the light too low to see clearly. Then. Movement. 2 shadows appeared behind the curtain. Not 1. 2. My hand clamped over my mouth. I was shaking so hard I could barely keep the mirror steady. Someone was in my house. More than one person. I didn't wait. Still crouched, I slipped along the edge of the yard, keeping low behind the bushes, then broke into a sprint the second I hit the path. My feet pounded against the ground, lungs burning as I tore through the neighborhood. The small market in the center of the community came into view. Usually, someone would still be around this time of night. But this was the countryside. Quiet fell early out here. It was barely past 10. And the shop was already closed. Lights off. Shutters down. I stood beneath the flickering neon sign outside the shuttered convenience store, body still trembling from head to toe. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might actually give out. When I wiped a hand across my forehead, it came away damp, sweat was dripping down my temples. Since when were burglars this bold? It wasn't even that late, and they had the nerve to sneak into someone's home? Just then, a black car skidded to a stop by the curb. The door flung open, and Matthew came sprinting toward me. "Selena, are you okay?" he called, voice tense with urgency. The second he reached me, I collapsed into him, arms around his waist, head buried against his chest. "Matthew," I mumbled, voice shaky, "what took you so long?" He wrapped me in a strong, steady hold, one arm around my shoulders, the other gently patting my back. There. It's okay now. I've got you." His body was warm, solid, grounding. I could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, steady and strong against my cheek. That warmth, that familiar scent of sweat and aftershave, everything about him made me feel safer than I'd felt in hours. And maybe I clung just a little longer than necessary. Because Matthew was tall, and his arms were strong, and his embrace felt like a place I didn't want to leave. "Selena," he said at last, still holding me close, "what happened?" Reluctantly, I pulled away, still keeping one hand on his arm. "There were people in my house," I said. "Two of them. I heard something from the bedroom, looked through the curtain, and I saw them." Even just saying it out loud made me shudder. Thank God I wasn't asleep in there. Thank God I'd been in the studio, buried in work. Art may have actually saved my life. Matthew's jaw tightened. He reached out and gently smoothed my hair back, worry in his eyes. "Come on. Let's go check it out together." And just like that, he laced his fingers through mine. He was the one who initiated it. So of course I took full advantage, clutching his hand tightly with one, and looping my other arm through his, pressing half my body against his side. "Matthew," I said, putting on the tiniest quiver in my voice, "I'm scared." He shifted slightly, then froze. His arm had just brushed against my chest. We both went still. I stared straight ahead like nothing had happened. Matthew looked like he was trying very, very hard to think about anything else. I cleared my throat and launched into a stiff, awkward summary of everything that happened, from the noise to the shadows to the sprint for my life. Anything to break the tension. We walked the rest of the way like that, awkwardly glued together, but neither of us letting go. Finally, we reached my house. I stopped at the gate, suddenly hesitant. Matthew glanced back at me, and his voice was quiet but sure. "Don't worry. I'm here." Then he pushed open the door, and I followed him inside. Step by step. Into the dark. The bedroom was a mess. Drawers yanked open. Clothes scattered everywhere. My bras and underwear were tossed all over the floor like someone had deliberately emptied them out. Even my sleepwear, thin, silky things I usually kept tucked away, had been dragged into the open. Matthew moved toward the window. He crouched, then picked something up with a gloved hand. 2 cigarette butts. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a robbery. I followed him in a daze back to the studio. My easel had been knocked over. My paints and brushes scattered, trampled. And the draft I'd spent days working on, the commissioned BGA? Gone. A sick, cold suspicion bloomed in my chest. No. Please, no. I bolted back to the bedroom, instincts in full panic. Matthew followed, silent and watchful. I fell to my knees in front of the closet, ripping open drawers, shoving things aside, heart thudding in my ears. Several sets of lingerie, missing. Not misplaced. Gone. I wasn't being robbed. I was being watched. Targeted. Ever since the firefighters had carried out that statue in broad daylight, Matthew's statue, rumors had spread through the community like wildfire. They said I wasn't respectable. That I lived alone and had strange men coming in and out. That my home was filled with naked sculptures, with tools and equipment no good girl should have. They joked about me. They judged me. And some twisted someone, took it a step further. They didn't break in to steal valuables. They came for me. My hands were shaking. My lips had gone numb. Matthew stood nearby, still holding one of the cigarette butts, his eyes dark and fixed on me. He saw the fear. He saw the truth start to hit me like a freight train. He stepped closer. "Selena," he said, voice low, steady. "What happened?" Matthew's face darkened as I finished explaining. That easygoing warmth he usually carried vanished, replaced with something steely and tight. "Selena," he said quietly but firmly, "you can't keep living here. This place is too exposed. The courtyard's big, yeah, but the outer walls are low. Any adult man could climb over in seconds." He motioned toward the door, voice growing sharper. "And your locks? They're basic. One kick and they're done. It's just not safe." I sat down on the edge of the bed, defeated, staring at the scattered clothes and overturned drawers. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry but didn't even have the energy for it. "But I need the space," I murmured. "For work. The sculptures need high ceilings and open areas, especially the big ones. Normal apartments just don't cut it." Matthew didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me otherwise. He just walked over, knelt in front of me, and took my hand gently in his. Then, as if he were offering the most natural thing in the world, he said, "Then stay at my place." I blinked. "What?" He smiled, calm and solid, like it wasn't the biggest bombshell of the night. "You can come back here to work during the day. Do whatever you need. But at night, you sleep at my place." End of discussion. I stared at him, stunned. Live with Matthew? Sleep under the same roof as him? Won't that mess things up for you? I asked, heart in my throat. Like, what if it affects your chances of dating someone? The second the words left my mouth, I felt ridiculous. Like I'd walked right into my own trap. But Matthew didn't flinch. His smile widened, eyes crinkling at the corners with soft amusement. "I think I'm past worrying about that," he said. "Pretty sure the entire neighborhood thinks I'm into chains and hostage roleplay. If anything, this might improve my odds." I burst into a small, strangled laugh. Then he ruffled my hair, still holding my hand, eyes warm and steady. "Come on, Selena," he said. "I've got room. And I've got locks." I dragged out my suitcase, absolutely buzzing as I started packing. Alone. With Matthew. Under the same roof. Hormones. Tension. Fire. Oh yes, fire. Hee hee hee. The laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "What's so funny?" Matthew called from the doorway. I spun around, grinning like a lunatic. Thinking about fire. Passion. Sparks. The moment it left my mouth, I wanted to bite off my tongue and shove it down the garbage disposal. Matthew didn't miss a beat. "Fire? You know I specialize in putting that out, right?" I looked up at him. He raised an eyebrow. Smirking. That was a metaphor. It had to be. I zipped up my suitcase, locked the door behind me, and followed him to his place. Matthew lived in a high-end apartment complex downtown. Security was tight, ID checks, access cards, cameras, lit walkways. It was practically a fortress. For the first time in days, I actually breathed. His apartment was about 200 square meters, 3 bedrooms, warm-toned minimalist decor. Clean, lived-in, but with a cozy vibe that screamed future husband material. Honestly? It looked like a newlywed's dream home. "You can take the guest room," he said, casually. "I don't stay here much, usually only when I'm off duty." He gave me a quick tour, then pulled out a fresh set of bedding and started making the bed for me like it was second nature. I stood there watching him tuck in the corners, fluff the pillows, so fast, so smooth. Efficient, patient, competent. Matthew wasn't just hot. He was husband grade. Note to self, seal the deal. I was mid-daydream, picturing our future Sunday brunches and towel-sharing habits, when my stomach let out a traitorous growl. Matthew turned, grinning, and flicked my forehead. "Sit tight. I'll make you something." "Wait, he cooks too." I trailed after him like a hard-eyed puppy, plopping down at the dining table with my chin in my hands, watching as he put on an apron and started prepping. Those broad shoulders. That lean waist. Those perfect hips and legs. I was getting hungrier by the second. And not just for food. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew what he was doing. I imagined something hearty and fragrant, noodles dancing in the pot, savory broth bubbling. He set the bowl down in front of me. I leaned forward, full of reverence. And then stopped. Stared. One eyebrow twitched. A bowl of something, blackish, gluey, suspiciously shiny, stared back. Not ramen. Not even instant noodles. It looked like something that had survived a microwave disaster and then lost a fight with a blender. I looked up and met Matthew's eyes, wide, expectant, sparkling with the silent plea of a kid who just built his first Lego tower. "Tell me it's good. Lie if you have to." It was his cooking, after all. Maybe the looks were deceiving? I hesitantly picked up some noodles and took a bite. Oh. Oh no. It was like someone had mistaken a salt shaker for a ladle. Salty. Bitter. Sour. Spicy. Every flavor imaginable, all screaming for dominance in a single, confused, gooey bite. I forced it down with the composure of a contestant on a survival show. The spark in Matthew's eyes flickered. His lashes lowered as he tried to hide his disappointment behind them. "Not good, huh?" he murmured. "Yeah. Cooking's never really been my thing." I glanced at the still quivering mess in the bowl. I loved him, sure. But I did not love his cooking. And even love has limits. "Are you hungry?" "Let me make something," I said quickly, standing up and walking to him. I reached out, circling my arms around his waist to untie the apron. And froze. From this angle, from this distance, it didn't feel like removing an apron. It felt like holding him. I kept my eyes down, heart pounding as I focused on the knot. Matthew stood completely still, his breath fanning softly across my forehead, warm and just a little unsteady. His waist was lean, his back straight. I could completely wrap my arms around him. Too easily. And he wasn't stopping me. He wasn't even moving, just lifting his arms slightly to make it easier, letting me do it. Letting me touch him. The knot was a disaster. Matthew, the literal professional trained to untangle hoses in emergencies, had somehow managed to tie an impossible apron knot. The more I struggled, the closer we got. Every shift of my fingers brought me closer to his body. I could feel his heartbeat now, deep and fast and strong, vibrating beneath my fingertips. I was basically nose to chest with him. And his chest, oh God, was rising and falling in short, sharp breaths. My own breath was hot and shaky, sweat purling on the bridge of my nose. My fingers fumbled, more from nerves than the knot itself. Finally, the tie gave way. I exhaled, a long, relieved breath that hit him right across his chest. He tensed beneath it, like the air itself had jolted through him. And just as I began to pull my hands away, Matthew moved. He caught my arms gently but firmly, holding them in place against his waist. Then, wordlessly, wrapped his arms around me. He was hugging me. I looked up, shocked, straight into his eyes. His gaze had changed. It wasn't teasing. It wasn't gentle. It was dark, molten, hungry. The kind of look that didn't just see you, it devoured you. There was something almost dangerous in it. Like if I moved too quickly, I'd tip us both into something we couldn't come back from. Something real. Something reckless. Something that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. Arring, arring. Matthew's phone went off, the shrill ringtone slicing straight through the thick tension between us like a fire alarm at a candlelit dinner. I jolted back a full step, gasping for air. God, I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath. The moment had been so intense, so charged, I'd basically forgotten how lungs worked. Matthew picked up the call, his expression shifting in an instant, from molten to mission mode. Yes. I'm on my way. He hung up and turned to me, all business. Selena, I've got an emergency call. I need to head out now. He paused, his voice softening just a little. Make sure you lock the doors. I probably won't be back tonight. And just like that, he was gone. I stood there staring at the empty doorway, my heart still thudding against my ribs. We'd been so close. Just a breath away from crossing that line. One more second, and... Ugh. Frustrated, I slumped back into the chair, eyeing the infamous bowl of nightmare noodles still sitting on the table. Honestly? I couldn't bring myself to toss it. With a sigh, I pulled out my phone and took a photo. Then, without hesitation, saved it to my favorites. Matthew's first disaster dish. A memento. Of almosts. Of tension. Of what could have happened. I boiled some water, made myself a bowl of tomato egg noodles, and sat down to eat while mentally running through plans to upgrade my home security. I needed cameras. Motion sensors. Maybe a big, mean dog in the yard. Or a very committed boyfriend who sleeps lightly and punches hard. That night, I drank too much water before bed. In a daze, I got up to use the bathroom, half asleep, shuffling through the dark. I crawled back under the covers, still drowsy, ready to pass out again. Until a strong arm wrapped firmly around my waist. I froze. A warm chest pressed against my back, breath ghosting along the nape of my neck. Selena, Matthew murmured, his voice thick with amusement, you did this on purpose, didn't you? Matthew was home. And this was his bed. Panic surged. I was facing away from him, totally still, hoping maybe if I didn't move, I'd phase out of existence. Matthew, I stammered. When did you get back? His hand was trailing along my waist now, rough fingertips, hot palm, slow and deliberate. He pressed his lips lightly to the slope of my shoulder, and suddenly, I was burning, from the inside out. Little flames ignited across my skin, sparking through my veins, leaving my thoughts in ruins. This moment. God, I'd imagined it for so long. But now that it was real, now that it was happening, I felt an unexpected wave of panic. I bolted upright, yanked his arm away, and leapt out of the bed like it was on fire. I'm sorry. Wrong room. I blurted, and dashed out like my life depended on it. Back in the guest room, I threw myself under the blanket, wrapped it around me like a cocoon, and screamed into the pillow. My face was on fire. Steam might actually have been rising from my ears. This is why I'm single. This exact moment. This is why. That perfect opportunity? That movie scene timing? I had launched myself away from it like a startled raccoon. I groaned into my blanket. Maybe tomorrow I'd have the guts to look him in the eye. Maybe. But for now? I buried myself under the covers, heart pounding, brain fried, and eventually, somehow, fell asleep. Still glowing. Still burning. Still, smiling. The next morning, I woke up to find that Matthew had already left. I let out a breath of relief, and then immediately felt a twinge of disappointment. He had to like me, right? After everything that happened, the look in his eyes, the way he held me, the way his hands had lingered on my waist, it wasn't just me reading too much into things. And yet, no confession, no real talk, just a quiet lock the door and a bowl of death noodles. Was he just playing around? I spent way too long overthinking, turning every moment into a scene from a drama, before finally pulling myself together and heading out. First stop, the electronics market. I bought enough security cameras to make my courtyard look like a police interrogation room. Next, the pet market. I left with a German shepherd, 3 bags of dog food, and a leash that looked like it was made for a lion. I returned home trailing behind the delivery truck, and immediately got to work, overseeing camera installation, setting up the doghouse, and adding a few motion-triggered outdoor lights. Only after everything was in place did I finally breathe. As for my stolen artwork? Gone. All I could do was start again. Just as I was sketching out a new composition, my phone buzzed. Mom. Here we go. Selena, she said the moment I picked up. Come home tonight. I'm introducing you to someone tomorrow at lunch. What? No. Mom, I told you, I'm not interested in being set up. Why not? She snapped. Women are like flowers, you wait too long, you'll wilt. You think you'll meet a good man when you're old? Get your butt home. I hung up, seething. But I knew I didn't have a choice. If I didn't go back willingly, she'd show up at my studio every hour on the hour, dragging the neighborhood elders along for backup. Sometimes, the only way to win was surrender. Before I left, I sent Matthew a message. I'm heading home tonight. My mom arranged a dinner date for me. I stared at the screen, nerves buzzing. If he really cared, he'd say something. Anything. 3 dots blinked. Then. Okay. Stay safe. That was it. No reaction. No question. No who is he or don't go. Just okay. I almost yeeted my phone across the room. So yesterday's tension meant nothing? All that heat, all that teasing, he could just shrug it off? Unbelievable. Matthew, you heartless jerk. I stormed back home, bitter and annoyed, greeted at the door by my mother's dramatic sigh and cutting side-eye. Look at that attitude, she muttered, already peeling fruit and setting down snacks like she was hosting a full-blown peace negotiation. I'm doing this for you, you know. One day you'll thank me. Mom, I groaned. She didn't stop. If you don't want me setting you up, then bring home someone yourself. I don't care who, as long as he's decent, employed, respectful, comes from a normal family, and doesn't look like he just crawled out of a video game. Well. Matthew checked all those boxes. Too bad he also checked the emotionally unavailable one. My expression must have given something away, because Mom changed her angle instantly. Selena, your father and I aren't getting younger. Look at my gray hair. You think I'll live forever? Can't you just give your old mother one last wish, to see you married off to a good man? Mom, I said flatly. You're 48. She blinked. Still, the clock is ticking. To convince me into this matchmaking lunch, my family had gone all in. The house was packed, relatives I hadn't seen in years, everyone gathered around the table like it was some kind of intervention. One aunt was singing praises about the guy's stable job. Another was lamenting the lonely old folks in nursing homes, subtly implying my future if I didn't settle down soon. The noise was relentless, overlapping voices, guilt-tripping glances, dramatic sighs. My head was spinning. I was seconds away from faking an emergency bathroom escape when. Selena, your boyfriend's here. The room fell silent. Stone cold, pin drop, jaw-dropping silent. I lifted my head, dazed. And there he was. Matthew. Grinning like he owned the place. Radiant, confident, and just a little smug. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said smoothly. "I'm Matthew, Selena's boyfriend." He greeted each relative like a pro, polite and composed, like he'd rehearsed for this exact moment. Then he turned to me, still smiling. "I've got something in the car. Come help me grab it?" I followed him outside, stunned, the door swinging shut behind us like the punctuation on a bombshell. The gasps from inside were deafening. You. Tongue-tied?" Matthew teased. I blinked, still trying to process. "What are you even doing here?" "I came to get my wife back," he said, easy and straight-faced. "You were about to be stolen by some stranger. Couldn't let that happen." I stared at him, face blazing. "Wife? What wife?" And yet, my heart was thumping so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. Matthew pinched my cheek, eyes warm. "Go ahead and smile," he said gently. "You want to?" I turned my head to avoid his hand, trying to sound annoyed even as my lips trembled with a smile. "When did I become your wife, huh?" Matthew grinned. "Didn't you call me babe yesterday? And now you're denying everything?" Before I could argue, he pulled me by the hand toward the back of his car and popped open the trunk. A wave of gasps erupted from behind the house windows. I turned to see half my relatives plastered against the glass, eyes wide. Inside the trunk, an entire sea of roses. Dozens and dozens of deep red blooms. In the middle, a pink heart-shaped box. Matthew opened it slowly, revealing a stunning diamond necklace that sparkled like it had its own spotlight. Then he looked at me, serious for once, voice low and steady. "Selena, I know you've had doubts. And I get it, I'm not always around, and I'm not the best with words. But I'm not here to mess around. I've liked you for a long time. And I know you like me too. I want to do this right. I want your family to know I'm serious. After this, I want you to come home with me so my parents can meet you too." He stepped closer. "Selena," he said softly, "will you be with me?" My heart exploded. All those quiet dreams, every what if, every almost, every stolen look and missed opportunity. They all clicked into place, just like that. Tears welled up in my eyes as I threw my arms around him. Because the best feeling in the world is when the person you love loves you right back. Matthew and I hauled the bags and flowers inside, trying to act normal. Like we hadn't just staged a romantic ambush in front of a dozen gaping relatives. My mom's eyes were practically shooting daggers, but I still grabbed Matthew's hand and obediently sat with him on the living room couch like a good little daughter presenting her very guilty boyfriend. "Matthew," my mom began, tight smile barely masking the interrogation vibes, "Auntie's always liked you, you know." "Really? It's just..." She glanced at the other relatives who were already pretending not to eavesdrop. "Well, that incident last time." "Oh no. You know the one. Everyone's been talking. We all heard. You and that girl, tied up? Bound like that?" She leaned in, lowering her voice like she was asking about a gang crime. "It's not a good look, honey." I let out a strangled groan and slapped a hand to my forehead. "Right. I forgot to explain that part." "Mom," I said, trying to sound calm and not at all like someone spiraling. "That girl was me." "What?" My mom and dad screamed in unison so loudly I thought my eardrums might bleed. "It's not what you think," I blurted. "It was an art thing. A statue. A painting reference. The chains were fake. The blood was paint. I wasn't a hostage, I was inspired." By the time I finished stumbling through that half-coherent mess of an explanation, my mom had finally exhaled. Only to suddenly whip around and start whacking me with her hand. "You child. You menace. You had a boyfriend this whole time and said nothing? Do you know how much effort we wasted arranging that match? All that planning, for what? Dinner was chaos. Matthew sat between two aunts and three uncles who tag-teamed him like a rotating panel of HR interviewers. What's your salary? Do your parents live nearby? How many hours a week do you work? Do you cook? Do you fight fires shirtless like in the movies? He barely got a bite in. Under the table, I slipped my hand into his. He squeezed it gently, reassuringly. And even as the dinner dragged on and my relatives transformed into background noise, I sat there, beaming, heart bubbling like champagne. Because through all the embarrassment and interrogation and chaos, this was real. This was us. And the joy I felt sitting next to him, our fingers intertwined under the table. It came in waves. I didn't need some forced blind date or awkward matchmaking anymore. Everything had fallen into place, just the way it should. So, of course, I went home with Matthew. As we drove, he glanced over and said, almost casually, "Good news. They caught those two creeps." I stared at him, shocked. That fast? How? Matthew explained how he'd taken the cigarette butts from my room straight to the police station that night and filed a report. Turns out the village did have a few surveillance cameras, old, but functional. Between those and the DNA bluff the cops pulled, it didn't take long to identify the men, two renters working at the mechanic shop down the road. Low-level predators who'd mistaken rumor for invitation. They cracked fast, Matthew said. Didn't even need the test. They spilled everything once the cops got serious. I was still stunned, a quiet sort of gratitude swelling in my chest. Matthew's fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel. "You're not staying there alone at night anymore," he said firmly. "From now on, you come home with me. I won't sleep easy otherwise." I hesitated, teasing. "Let me think about it." He didn't answer. Instead, he made a sudden turn down a quiet, overgrown road on the edge of the village. The car rolled to a stop beneath a cluster of wild trees. Crickets hummed in the stillness. "Why are we stopping here?" I asked, puzzled. I turned my head. And he was already leaning in. One hand cradled the back of my neck, the other braced beside my seat. And then his lips were on mine. It was warm and steady and breath-stealing. The scent of late summer clung to the air, trees, dust, the faint tang of unripe fruit, and everything outside the car just fell away. Then his voice, soft and low against my lips. "Thought about it yet?" He leaned his forehead against mine, eyes half-lidded, smiling like he already knew my answer. "Or do you need more time to decide, My breath caught. My heart was a drumbeat in my throat. And then, without words, I nodded. A soft, almost trembling little yes. And with that, everything was decided. The end.